Have you ever felt a bit lost in practice? I have. I'm going to share with you a story about my first few weeks in practice. I look back on it now and cringe, but I'm sharing it with you because it highlights exactly why I got into coaching skills and why I think they're so important. My first year in practice, I was fortunate enough to work for an established group of clinics who'd been awarded an NHS Any Qualified Provider contract. This meant that in addition to private patients, I also had the opportunity to treat people who'd been referred to the clinics via the NHS. There was really strict criteria about accessing the service, the number of treatments, and a lot of paperwork to go alongside it. We were really busy, and there was a lot of demand for the services. Although I was really well supported in the clinics, within weeks of graduating, I remember starting to feel more than a little overwhelmed, and it became my dirty little secret. Loads of my friends were talking about how great being in practice was, how busy they were, how fantastic all their patients were doing. And whilst I had some of that, I also had a gnawing doubt niggling in the back of my mind that something just wasn't right. Call it imposter syndrome, call it new grad nerves, call it inexperience, whatever it was, I felt out of my depth. I vividly remember we had one person who came into the clinic, referred to us via her GP. For the purposes of this story and confidentiality, I'm going to call her Jane. Jane was on crutches, accompanied by her husband, and it was a huge amount of effort just for her to get down the corridor. Step by painful step, she hobbled her way down. She wasn't even able to sit in the treatment room, instead just propping herself awkwardly against a wall. I was so flustered. I checked the clock and 8 minutes of my consultation time had already been taken up. Now, I should add, we had such a limited number of appointments with our NHS patients, so not only was there the worry of now not getting through everything I needed to in this session, but there was that familiar knot of tension building in my chest as I started to worry about running late for the next patient, and the next patient, and the next patient. 8 minutes had gone just like that. I was so caught up in my own head, which was really not a great place to be at any point when you're in with a patient. The next thing I remember is Jane's husband following her into the room. He brandished some paperwork at me, an MRI report, and started demanding, "You need to read this. Before you do anything, before you touch her, you need to read this." Now, I had my own plan of what I needed to do, and jumping straight into reading an MRI report wasn't exactly top of the list. I hadn't even greeted Jane yet. I told Jane's husband as much and asked him to please let Jane talk instead. Not the best move for building rapport, but at that time I was more preoccupied with building rapport with Jane and not her husband. "I'm just trying to help, if you just let Jane talk." Of course, now I know that rapport with the support network is just as important, and it's so important to get them on side as well, but all I could see at the time was this overprotective husband who was blocking Jane from talking. As I recall, I whizzed through the rest of the consultation so I could get to the exam. It seemed to me like a really simple problem, and I couldn't quite understand why Jane was on crutches and in so much pain, especially after looking through the MRI report. We talked a bit about exercises at home, self-management things, and I gave her some things to do, all the advice that you'd usually give, and she went on her way. What followed after that with her appointments was what I would describe as a bit of a battle of wills. Each appointment, I'd ask Jane how she got on with her exercises. She'd tell me she didn't do them and was still in pain. Her husband would question me constantly. Why wasn't she getting better? Was I sure about the treatment? Did she need another MRI? You're not helping her. You're not helping her. You are not helping her. I felt awful. I didn't seem to be making any progress. I was doubting myself so much. I could see Jane was getting increasingly more despondent every time I saw her, and her husband was getting more and more frustrated. A second opinion confirmed that we were on the right track with the treatment, but there was something still going wrong. Jane didn't seem to want to do her exercises, seemed really disinterested in the process, and let her husband take complete control. I doubled down and would justify myself constantly, defending myself, defending the treatment plan, and just feeling more and more confused, frustrated, and unsure. And if that was how I was feeling, I can only imagine what it must have been like for Jane and her husband. After their fourth appointment, the second to last one they got, I came home and remember talking to a colleague about it. "I just don't get why they're not following my advice. I know what's best for her." I know what's best. Looking back, I can pick out each and every mistake overanalyze it, understand the thinking behind it, know where I went wrong and what I should have done instead. I know her husband was fulfilling a caregiving role. I know he was being protective. I know I should have worked to get him on board with the treatment plan. I know I should have set a shared agenda, worked more collaboratively, reassured Jane, explored the reasons behind her not adhering to the advice, set goals to help her succeed and get some small wins under her belt. There is so much that I could have done differently. That's what I know now. It took me a few years more before I realised that actually my patients weren't not following my advice. They just weren't buying it. It didn't mean anything to them. It didn't work with them or fit in with their life, their goals, what they wanted from seeing me. At no point had I known to check in to see what mattered to Jane. I hadn't investigated different approaches that I could have tried that perhaps would have made this experience better for all of us. It's not easy to share that story, but when I have shared it with others, it's something that everyone has been able to relate to, at least some parts of it. The feeling of frustration when a patient doesn't follow our advice, the feeling of anxiety when the consultation is being directed by someone else and it's out of our control, the feeling of responsibility for feeling like I need to fix every patient, of making all the decisions, of working with someone who doesn't seem interested in getting better, who doesn't really want to be involved in a treatment plan. This experience set me on a path of looking for ways to have better conversations, to work more as a team with my patients, so it didn't feel like an us versus them, and instead I could feel like I was working as part of a team with them, facing the problem together, as cliched as that sounds. Eventually, my search led me to coaching. Now, Rhiannon and I often say that the best way to learn coaching is to be coached yourself, and this was absolutely the case for me. It's one of the reasons why we have group coaching sessions in this course. It was such a powerful experience, and it felt like seeing the light at the end of a tunnel. After finishing my training, I suddenly had tools and techniques that helped me draw out so much golden information from the people I was working with. What's their motivation? Why does it matter to them? Where do I fit into the picture of getting them better? What can they do to help? What can't they do? How do we work around all of this? How can we work together? How do we structure the consultation so we get everything covered but don't run over? All of these things coaching helped with. It completely changed the way that I practiced. Coaching skills have made me a better practitioner, a better employer, a better colleague, and even a better wife and mum. I really hope that by sharing some of our knowledge with you and taking you through the foundations of coaching skills, we can help you have more powerful conversations with your patients. Coaching skills are something that I have continued to use every day in practice. It's not just something that helped me as a new graduate. I've been in practice about 5 years before I began to learn coaching skills. They're something that many of us use anyway. They're probably skills that you're familiar with, and some parts of this course you might look at and think it's actually quite familiar, but that is a good thing. This course is going to help you build upon those skills, build upon that knowledge, understand a bit more of the theory behind it, and teach you something new.